My name is Jamie Piles. I joined Samaritan in December of 1996. We were homeschooling our kids, and we were already thinking outside the world's box, if you will. And I saw a little tiny classified ad about this new kind of idea I'd never heard of before. My first reaction was, that's the kind of thing that we would do, isn't it? And so I finally called the number, talked to them, and the more I asked them questions, the more I liked their answers.
Welcome to Cross Politic. I'm the Chocolate Knox, Pastor Toby to my right, and not Gabe is here.
Not Gabe.
Not Gabe.
Not Gabe.
No, we'll get to our special guest.
Gabe's like never here anymore.
No, I know. You know, we haven't been here either, hardly. It's been so weird. Okay, I got to talk about this real quick. I have been in production mode, just filming and editing, and I don't know if it's day or night sometimes because I've been, and I'll tell you something, being in the bunker editing, I don't care about what's going on. I have no cares. And it feels weird to come out and read the news and like, this is crazy town. And I'm going to be honest with you, I don't miss any of it.
You got a little more sympathy for Biden?
Maybe a little bit, you know.
What's going on?
I just wish people would just,
What's going on?
It doesn't matter how many mistakes he makes. I don't know why Republicans keep sharing it. Like they just keep, Biden did this, Biden did that. It doesn't matter anymore. Everybody knows the man's not here. It just doesn't. Like
you saw him with the king.
The king.
Today?
The king is being so merciful to us. Come on, Joe. Come on, Joe. This way, Joe. He doesn't talk to us, Joe. You should know better than that, Joe. You've done this numerous times. It's so sad.
Oh my goodness, he doesn't.
It doesn't matter.
Hey, but you're working on stuff for the pub.
That's right.
The Fight Laugh Feast pub is coming along. We're cranking this summer on content. The pub is the new name for our club.
That's right.
And so we got content that we're trying to pump in there. You guys have been filming a cooking show.
So we got a show on body armor with Gabe called This America. We've been talking about that. So he does body armor with Armor Republic. That's cool. Mm-hmm. And then something weird. He goes and does this show on Transformers. And you would think like, which one you want to see? Body armor with guns going off and explosions, or Transformers. And it's like, Transformers is pretty interesting too.
Can't pick.
It's really good. And so we have that, and then cooking.
Cooking.
Oh, the cooking shows.
Yeah. Okay.
So good.
And this is dropping.
As soon as the app is approved inside the App Store, which I think is supposed to be any day now, we'll have the first episode of This America. I just finished one on Maddox. I'm doing the sound mix on that, and then I'm jumping to the first cooking show. So every week after that, we'll be dropping a new show inside there.
So if you're not yet a club member, sign up today. It's going live soon, and your app that you already have. You have the Fight Laugh Feast app. It'll automatically update, and you'll have the new one, the brand spanking new one.
Yes. Making content for you.
Before we begin, I want to remind you that this year our Fight Laugh Feast conference is at the Ark Encounter in Kentucky on the politics of 6-day creation.
Yes.
The politics of 6-day creation is the difference between a fixed standard of justice and a careening standard of justice, which is not really a standard of justice at all. The difference between corrosive relativism that creates mobs and anarchy and the freedom of objectivity, truth, and due process. The politics of 6-day creation establishes the authority and the sufficiency of God's word for all of life. From what is a man, what is a woman, when does human life begin, and then, of course, how is human society best organized? So come here, Ken Ham, who built the Ark. Well, not like Noah.
The new Noah?
Noah
2.0.
But he's Noah 2.0. Pastor Doug Wilson will be giving 2 talks. Dr. Ben Merkel will be there. Dr. Gordon Wilson of Riot and the Dance fame. We have Dr. Joe Rigney coming out. I'll be giving a speech, even though I'm not a doctor like the rest of them. And we'll be having a live show. A live show.
Yeah.
Which we don't know what's about yet, but it's going to be awesome.
Gabe's going to surprise us, I'm sure.
Yeah, he's going to be like, guess who I invited, guys? Anyways, mark your calendars, October 11th through the 14th as we fight, laugh, and feast with beer and psalms the first night, our amazing lineup of speakers, rowdy Christian merch, a Sabbath feast to wrap everything up, maybe even an infant baptism while we're at it. Yes, Toby, you have to read that part. That's what it says.
That's actually mandatory.
Maybe, if my elders say I can. Visit fightlaughfeast.com for more information. Sign up today with hundreds more who have already signed up. We're really excited. Grateful to have with us in the studio, not Gabe actually has a name. His name is Pastor Uri Brito. He's pastor at Providence CREC in Pensacola, Florida. Author, founder of the Kuyperian Commentary It just says KypeCom. Is that how, do you actually call it KypeCom?
Yep.
Oh, okay. Oh. KypeCom. It's like me when I call it, Dutch Brothers.
Okay, and you call it Dutch Bros?
And the kids call it Dutch Bros.
Yeah, right.
And they say, Dad, it's called Dutch Bros. And I said, no, it's Dutch, that's short for brothers.
Right.
Yeah. Anyways, KypeCom, board member at Theopolis, senior fellow of CCL, and you're the current presiding minister of Athanasius Presbytery.
Athanasius Presbytery, yeah.
Oh my goodness, we're like this is like holy ground.
It's been 2 years since we had you on the show too, right?
Yeah, it's been a while. We were in Monroe, Louisiana
at the council.
For council, that's right.
That's right. And that was before you were presiding minister, or you were already presiding minister then?
Had just been elected.
Oh wow, I didn't even know that at the time. Yeah, wow. So I mean, he's like just cranking up through the echelons of the CREC, like pretty much.
We were at church yesterday, and I had no idea you were going to be here. And I look up, I'm serving up, pork shoulder because we had a picnic outside. The floor was getting done. All the churches were there.
Yep.
And
outdoor church.
And I look up, and I'm like, "Is that Uri?
Pastor Uri.
In the flesh?
In the flesh."
I was like, "Oh my goodness, good to see you, man."
So, great to have you back. Great to have you in the studio in Moscow.
Yeah.
And you're here in town because you are the main speaker for the New St. Andrews College Called Conference. By the way, I don't know if we've advertised this on the show before.
Like once or twice.
But Called Conference is a conference for high schoolers that New St. Andrews College puts on every summer. There's actually 2 weeks of it.
Yeah.
So this is day one, bro. But you're getting ready for 2 weeks, coming full bore at high school students. This is kind of like, I describe it as like, this is like worldview camp, worldview boot camp.
Right.
And we bring a special speaker in, and several of others of us in the community give talks throughout the week. And of course, there's some games and activities sprinkled in and everything else, but it's pretty high octane instruction. And so you're the main speaker. Tell us about what you're talking about this week.
Yeah, the Call Conference has that flavor. It's sort of a boot camp. So you're immersing these 15, 18-year-olds, we'll have around 400 of them, into some very deep theological subjects. And so they're going to be receiving good instruction biblically and worldview. They're going to be taught how to live faithfully in light of the principalities and powers of our age. And they're going to hopefully be encouraged to have courage in an age of uncourageous 15 to 18-year-olds. And so this year, the topic that I've chosen is a topic that I've been concentrating for some time on, and it has to do with this remarkable contrast between priesthoods. And the primary passage for that is Ephesians 6, where Paul sort of ends in this motivational speech to the church of Ephesus, speaking specifically about describing the armor of God and the unique nature of each feature of the armor of God and how they build on one another. And in the end, it concludes with this benediction where Paul says, "Be of courage. This is who God has dressed you to be, a new priest in a dark world of false priests." And so that's my encouragement to these 400 students these next 14 days.
Okay, hold on. So that sounds really great and everything.
I'm just going to get my...
But you said priesthood, and then you talked about the armor of God.
Yeah.
I mean, everybody knows that's completely different stuff.
Right. Yeah, no, that's...
How'd you get there?
That is true. Okay, good point. One of the primary assumptions I've always had when I think through the apostolic writings as they're addressing churches and other scenarios is that the apostolic first language has always been the Old Testament. And they use their first language to communicate their languages to each individual church. And so the apostles are very much steeped in the language, vocabulary, grammar, rhythm, and everything else in the unique flavor environment of the Old Testament, which means their vocabulary doesn't come from extracurricular literature. It comes specifically from the only language they know. It's their first language, and they speak it very fluently.
So they didn't unhitch it? Just trying to figure out.
Oh, that's very good. No, it didn't Stanley their way through the process. And so what the Apostle Paul specifically is doing, he's using the language that's familiar to them, and he's addressing the church in that familiar language. And so the general consensus in the scholarly world is that the Apostle Paul is staring through a prison cell into a Roman soldier that may be guarding him, and he's saying, "I'm building this armory image from that."
You got the sword of the Spirit,
got the sword,
and you got the shield of faith, and okay,
that's right. But what happens is, if you look at the image of a Roman soldier who sort of thrives in barbarism and thrives in ungodliness and thrives in the pursuit and the defense of an unholy empire, the Apostle Paul had something more noble in mind. And what he was doing, he was building a bond of loyal priests who were loyal to a holy empire founded by Jesus Christ. And so what Paul was looking at is he was staring at the image that was most common to his own vocabulary, which is the image of the priest that you find described in Exodus and in Leviticus. And if you look at through the Old Testament, you're going to see that language is very consistent, and that the language of priesthood is something that has been very much ingrained in the very fabric of the scriptures, beginning in the formation of Adam and continuing all the way to the second Adam, Jesus Christ, who is our true high priest.
So is that just one talk, or are you gonna? Is that the main talk, and then all of them are gonna fit inside of?
I'm going to be developing those verses 10 through 20, Ephesians 6, developing that into 5 different themes, focusing specifically in the beginning. The first talk tonight will emphasize that the evangelical church has been very fearful of recognizing that the devil is at work in the life of the church and in tempting God's faithful priests. And so one of the themes that I'll be addressing is that the Christian needs to stop being fearful of addressing the embodiment of evil, which is Satan himself, the great accuser. And we need to take a more courageous stand in protecting the true and holy and beautiful that God has given us.
How has the church shown that fearfulness, as you see?
The church has shown its fearfulness in certainly 3 ways, but it has shown its fearfulness in defending the authority of the scriptures, has shown its fearfulness in protecting the good of Western civilization, and has shown its fearfulness in its piety towards the culture. So in terms of protecting the authority of the scriptures, the culture has been, and the evangelical church included, has essentially affirmed the scriptures in the background. It's their background music, but what's on display is anything but. And so while the church is displayed in the background for people to pick up a copy as they come in and leave, the reality that you see in the pulpit is very different than that. So there is no embodied biblical theology in the way people do things, so that the church has become largely embarrassed of the scriptures. And so they do things, as you said, David, they unhitch the scriptures because now I don't have to be as embarrassed. And so what they're doing essentially is really nothing new. This has happened throughout the 19th, 20th century of German higher criticism, where the church has become so embarrassed, and there was this division that Machen spoke of. The fundamentalists stand in one hand, they believe in that literal stuff, right, 6-day creation, and then the new evangelicals or the Bartians believe in something different, something more sophisticated. And I am calling for a return of old-time Pauline religion, and that means we embody a courage of the scriptures, and we know exactly that God says, this is clean and this is unclean, and let that word be final.
It's really interesting that you tie in defending American Western civilization in with all 3 of those. So it seems like they're all connected in one sense. Not to defend it is almost in one sense giving up ground that was taken by the church historically too, right? Is that what you're doing with that?
Yeah, yes, because the church has denied, rejected, been embarrassed of the normative nature of the scriptures, that the scripture is the norm for all things. And where do you find the normativity of scriptures most clearly manifested outwardly, culturally,
in
sociologically?
Politics,
you find it in politics,
government.
You find it in government, and you find it in the literature of Western civilization. And so at that point, it's a clear strategy that the unbelieving culture has taken, which is to address those things that most clearly exemplify the normativity of scriptures. And that's the beauty of Shakespeare, the beauty of the American government, the Republican system, the beauty of Western literature, which is very much dependent on the vocabulary and language of sacred scriptures. It builds its language derived from that.
Would you put monuments and those things inside of Western civilization? Because I think that part of what people don't see in the battle is like
statues of Stonewall Jackson.
Yeah, absolutely. Would that fit inside of there too? Because it seems to be that's leverage to get underneath, because no one wants to defend a guy who, has slaves, right? And so they use that as leverage, so you don't defend that, or you don't argue for the need, what's really trying to be represented, right? You're not trying to say, yes, let's have slavery, where you're trying to represent something else, right? Is that also happening? So it's like, let's not defend that. Let's just let them take it down.
I think so, because the nature of the Bible is that it presents a consistent symbol from beginning to end. And so therefore, Western civilization has built itself around symbols and imageries and statues and monuments and tangible things that represent what's good of it, and sometimes even what's bad in it, right? Mm-hmm. Part of being a Christian is acknowledging the nature of total depravity and acknowledging the promise of a total redemption. And so when culture looks at that, and it sees Christians acknowledging both good and evil and saying, no, this is our history. What they want to do is only point out and observe the evil or whatever was wrong with it, and we're perfectly comfortable in affirming these things. And so what they're going to do is they're going to say, we are not a symbolic civilization. Western civilization was symbolic. We're not symbolic, but therefore we'll destroy all your symbols because your symbols represent who you are. So there's this distinct contradiction in the way they act, meaning that they are uniquely priestly as Christians are, but their priesthood is derived from the father of lies.
So I wanted to actually follow up on that. I'm glad you brought that back up, because I was going to ask you, you said there's an alternative priesthoods is what you're interested in, is sort of presenting and unfleshing this week. And I know this is a theme that you're interested in general.
Yeah.
Give us, what do you mean by that? Everybody knows, Uri, we live in a secular state.
Right.
This is a secular, neutral. Haven't you ever heard of the First Amendment?
Right.
Separation of church and state. Right. So we're the religious freaks. We're the hard right, religious right, whatever you want to call us. They are the neutral secularists. They're not religious. What do you mean by alternative priesthood?
So the alternative priesthood, when I speak of that, what I mean entailing is that there's no neutral religiosity. There's no neutral proposition.
Right.
And so what they are describing, if you were to put in a piece of paper, is an antithetical liturgy that, if you were to put it, Christians have a liturgy. They have a way of being, a way of doing life, a way of serving, a way of giving, a way of sacrificing, a way of lifting offerings to the heavens. The unbelieving community is also a priesthood because they have a way of living. They have a set liturgy that they follow. They have an agenda. They have inscripturated authority that they follow.
It's inescapable.
It's inescapable.
Right.
And so therefore, part of the Christian goal is to acknowledge that we have a priesthood, but that they also have alternative priesthoods led by false leaders with their false garments, with their false colors, right? With a false agenda.
Right.
And so we're simply making that contrast very vivid in religious language so we can echo the scriptural dimensions. Because in the Old Testament, what you see is that the priests were operating in a way that represented everything that God's people were. And so the priest is embodied in garments and colors that represented the temple, the tabernacle, and the tent of meetings, because the place and the priest were to represent the people. And so if you turn that to the secular world, there are places and people that places and priests that represent the people as well. So that parallel is very, very clear.
Yeah, there's a reason for all the flags. There's a reason for all the parades. There's a reason for the spectacles. There's a reason why you have to. They're doing what they're doing in public because they're saying something about what they want the people to be like.
Right. They have their processionals and recessionals and their benedictions too. Yeah. The language is different, but they have that. And we've seen this very often.
Right.
Give me one of their benedictions. That's interesting.
Well, their benedictions would be granted by their false priests. It could be their political leaders, and they're saying in many
they have
ways,
their own doxology.
Actually, it's funny. I was watching. I try not like the people are sharing all kinds of stuff. It's just junk. I get kind of tired of watching. Like I know they're doing perverse stuff. Stop showing it to me.
I said that.
I don't want to see it anymore. But I caught a glimpse of this one video clip. I don't remember where it was recently on social media, but there was one of these drag parade things going on, and there's this guy in a pseudo priestly garment, and somebody comes and kneels before him, and he puts his hands on her, she, I don't know what they were, and said, and I didn't listen to it, so I don't know what they were saying, but it was a benediction.
Yeah.
It was bless me, Father, for I have sinned.
Yes.
Kind of moment in the middle of a drag parade.
Yeah, that's insane. Yeah, there's a kneeling and confessing of sins, and
right.
and that occurs.
Yeah, right. Whether we're confessing our whiteness.
Yes,
or
exactly.
confessing our cisgenderedness, or whatever our sins are.
Yeah.
Of heteronormativity or whatever. There's
still sins there too. You don't escape the reality.
Those are the sins that you need to repent of.
And they want to relive Adam before the fall, and so they're very comfortable naked. There's no attempt to cover up anything, and so their nakedness is a revelation that they want an utopian world, and so therefore they want to be in a world where animals are worshipped,
right?
Where animals are adored, where they can name and call and control everything.
That's true.
It's funny as you're talking about this, and the more you get this is why it's really important to be engulfed in your Old Testament, because one of the Moses, as he's the children of Israel coming out, and God is telling Moses, hey, you make sure that you build the tabernacle exactly how you saw it here in heaven on earth, because that's what's supposed to be transactioning, right? From heaven on earth. The model is supposed to be made to look like heaven. And so if that's the case and you have this priesthood, everybody is bringing in some sort of heaven, right? Some sort of alternative ethereal world that's supposed to be imprinting itself on reality, right? And if it's the pagans in their worldview, they're going to have a different God. They're going to bring a whole different type of world to reign on reality. And that's where the conflict, I never thought of it, but they have their own Leviticus. They have their own laws there. They have their own Exodus, right? They have their own 10 Commandments. They have their own post-eschatology.
Well, and this is why at the center of it is their blood sacrament of abortion.
Right. So
it's their ascension offering.
It is it's their blood sacrifice, and they've got to have it. They've got to have it.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like visceral.
It's a liturgy.
And it's because if you will not have the blood of Christ, then there's going to be blood.
So, and what you're talking about then, are you saying that the way that we have done our Christian liturgy has been so weak and ineffective that it doesn't have any impact on the world ultimately? When you talk about priest, right? Is that part of what you're bringing?
Yes,
up?
that's very much part of what I'm saying. And part of the dynamic of, I think, of the Old Testament is that when God speaks of what ought to be involved in the worship of God's people, is that there is a distinct incense that ought to flavor and aromatize the place of God, the holy place. And then there are incenses, smells that ought to remain in the outside. And so what the unbelieving world does is they want to also provide an incense that's distinct to their world. And so every single unbelieving liturgy is going to function on the basis of blood. And so think of the unbelieving liturgy as a liturgy that has never progressed redemptively. They've remained in blood. They've remained in cutting. They've remained in markings. They've remained in failing to differentiate between clean and unclean. They've remained in the desert, and they're content with that world. And so they're constantly attempting to move to something, but they're stuck in a blood sacrificial world. Their priesthood is constantly providing, redemption for their sins, forgiveness for their sins. But the reality is that for them, there is no ultimate forgiveness. Yeah. But they continue to live in that cycle.
I saw a headline yesterday or the day before that I think it's in Ireland.
Yeah.
The country is either decided or is contemplating euthanizing about I want to say like 200,000 cattle.
Wow.
Perfectly healthy cows in order to meet their climate change goals.
Yeah.
It's like they're almost literally offering sacrifices to God. to the goddess.
Right.
Like if we do not meet this imaginary standard set by our high priestly case of scientists that say that cows apparently give off too much gas that harm our mother nature, we have to kill them.
Yes.
We are almost literally back there.
And these are the same people who were just mocking. Remember those folks who used to dance outside for rain? Right?
Yeah, I know.
They were mocking them, and here they are doing the same thing.
And don't forget, these are the same folks that were telling us that if you didn't mask up and take the jab, that millions would die.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I mean, golly.
Go ahead.
Fauci is the American representative of the priesthood. And I think that was very clear during the COVID era. And so the failure that I've tried to point out in some of my writings of the American Evangelical Church is that they were very comfortable in giving over the keys that belonged to them to the nice men in suit outside.
Preach up! Come on now.
And so what happened was that the evangelical church failed to believe that they were a royal priesthood. And they thought, there is another royal man seeking our allegiance, and as a way of appeasing them, as a way of entering into their liturgy, or giving a little bit of our sacrifice unto them so we can find common ground, we found our man. We found our man, and Fauci became that kind of figure who was very much adored by many evangelicals, especially in the early days. Yeah. He's fallen a little bit out of popularity, obviously, but that's how it is. Priesthood come and go. When one priest loses popularity, the secular world is very clear to place another one in his position and then adorn him with new garments.
Wow. Real quick, got an ad to read and then want to talk to you for a couple more minutes. Discover why more than 1 million people use the free Olive Tree Bible app as their go-to for reading, studying, and listening to God's Word. Start by downloading one of many free Bibles and start taking notes, highlighting verses, and bookmarking your favorite passages today. You can read at your own pace or choose from a large selection of reading plans, including the Bible Reading Challenge that originated here in Moscow, Idaho. When you're ready to go deeper into your studies, Olive Tree is right there with a large selection of study Bibles, commentaries, and other helpful study resources available for purchase. There's also an extensive bookstore, which allows you to build your digital library one book at a time, and Olive Tree's sync technology lets you pick up right where you left off on your tablet, your PC, your phone, and get right back to studying on another supported device. Here's the best part. You can start with the Olive Tree Essentials Bundle for free. Olive Tree Essentials Bundle is yours for free. Just visit olivetree.com/FLF and download it today.
Did you say free?
Yeah, did.
Go get it. Yeah. Go get the app. It's free, people. I mean, come on. I got William Perkins on there, just so everybody knows. I'm reading him from there. That's pretty awesome.
Oh, yeah. How about that?
So, did you have a question? Because I was just going to turn the corner real quick.
Go.
So, Christian nationalism.
Never heard of it.
Well, do you think, I was thinking about this a little bit today. Do you think if COVID not had been what it was, that Christian nationalism wouldn't have exploded on the scene? Or do you think it was coming anyway?
Most likely wouldn't have had the level of popularity it has today. I think there were works already tackling issues of Christian nationalism for some time ago, but I think what COVID did is it exacerbated, it accelerated people's thought process when it came to how do we project and offer something objective to a population that is losing control of their own senses, losing control of their own
objectivity.
Yeah. And so what can we do to provide a kind of holistic framework that'll give society coherence? I think Christian nationalism sort of jumped in and offered a level of coherence that people didn't have. I mean, before COVID, there was a sense of loyalty, a sense of patriotism. But COVID, very much like 9/11, what happened right after 9/11, provided people with a sense of urgency. Like if we don't have some level of authority or something definitive to hold on to, then we're going to be thrown on by every wind of doctrine. So Christian nationalism really, I think, filled that void.
The thing that I just keep I always go back to and think about is that the thing in COVID that happened for me that was just this we were already throwing flares up, but I think the moment that it was like the lights were all on was in the aftermath of the George Floyd death and the BLM marches, because then suddenly the contrast was. I mean, I already knew something weird was happening,
right?
But then now you had all these churches that are closed down. And some of the very pastors of the churches that are insisting we must stay closed down are in the marches.
That goes back to your point about the priesthood.
It's priesthood.
Yeah. Right.
It was
priesthood's flipped.
It was like, and the defense was, no, but this is important.
Right.
Oh.
Yeah, this worship service was essential.
Like we have got, this is essential. This is essential. We've got to have this church service and that not so much. I mean, that was when the boom lights came on for me. And it was like, and so, because and here's the thing is, because the question was, so it's, and you said this earlier, it's not whether, but which.
Right.
It's not whether you're going to have a religion, it's which. It's not whether there will be a God of the public square, it's which God will be the public square God. And so and what you had was in this moment with this crisis, everybody showed their hands. And the media and the elites and the leadership said, no, this is important. They have to have the right to protest because this is essential. This is sacred. Mm-hmm. And a bunch of Christians went right along with it. A bunch of pastors.
And the other side of that is that while we're out here singing Psalms, there was so much anger that we were, opposed to, and not the same thing towards the riots. It's like, well, they need to, how could you imagine these are Christians out here defying the government? Shame on them.
Right.
While the other side is.
You got to understand.
Right.
You got to understand. And the lengths they went to even defend violence and rioting. I mean, there's this rioting, these police stations are getting burned down. And of course, there's the one, where the guy's like, it's mostly peaceful. And there's flames, behind him going up in flames. And you're just thinking, if that's not a false religion, I don't know what is.
It's funny. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Uri.
No, I think that's a great point because I think the polis of the priesthood, right? The city itself was offered as a sacrifice for their gods, and so that's what they did. They offered cities as sacrifices, and they said, "This place will be ours one way or another.
Right.
If it's not ours legally, we will sacrifice this. There will be blood." And there was plenty of blood,
and there were innocent people killed. There were police officers that were killed. There were all kinds of things in the name of this holy rage. I mean, there's there will be blood. It is exactly right. And anyways, that was the thing for me in the COVID moment. That all these things were already happening, but I think that became that. I think I wonder what you think, Uri. But is that the thing that makes a bunch of people say, fine? If singing psalms is going to get me arrested, or if having my church open is going to get me, the term Christian nationalist because you kept your church open,
right?
It's like a bunch of people said, fine,
yeah,
fine. If that's what you think Christian nationalist means, that the church has its own priesthood that is equal to civil magistrates and other governments that God has established and has its own sphere of authority, fine.
Yeah, so there was certainly a fear. There was I call it a linguistic fear among the evangelicals, because for the first time they were being called things that they didn't want to be called. For the first time, their allegiance was being tested. And I'm always reminded of the way Calvin dealt with some of this in Geneva in the 16th century, is that even though there was a steady flow of refugees coming to Geneva, finding peace in Geneva through its government, through its ecclesiology, Calvin understood that these refugees were being accused of things where they're coming from. And Calvin said the church is a place for people who are being accused of things. And therefore, the expectation of the modern evangelical world during COVID was to say, we are comfortable not being accused of anything. But the very definition of the devil is that he's an accuser by nature. So there was a flaw, a fundamental flaw in grasping the reality that we are going to be linguistically accused, and that is part of our identity. And so that was the danger. And so as a result, even now, so if you ask 10 people what Christian nationalism is, there will be 10 probably definitions, right?
That's right.
But at this point right now, what it does reflect is the kind of people who love their country a lot and want to love the traditional things. And so as a result, that has become our four-letter word. And Christians are very quick to say, no, not me. I'm not with him.
Right.
I'm not. And the question is that they're so comfortable removing themselves from any kind of allegiance that they will deny that 300 or 300 times.
Okay. So then, okay. So do you like the term? Would you consider yourself a Christian nationalist? How? Because I don't know. I don't know where you stand on that.
I know all the players involved. I love every one of them. I've had a chance to spend time with them. I offered the invocation for the National Conservative Conference in Miami a few months ago. Yeah. And so I know the players. I know Yoram Hazony. I know Stephen Wolf. I have a great...
You dropped that down there. You dropped those. I see you.
I have a great respect and love for what they're trying to do. And I think I think what's happening is there are perspectives in how we restore society. Uh-huh. Pastor Wilson offers Christendom. Other folks offer Christian nationalism. What I want to see is all these groups offering unique perspectives to it come together and say, the war is much greater And these conversations need to continue to happen. These players need to be in the same room so that we realize that there's a strategy, and what you have is different perspectives, but the agenda is very similar. Someone might go through a Thomist route. Others might go through a more Biblicist route. Others might go through a Kuyperian route. At the end of the day, we are the people who are not embarrassed of accusations, and therefore we need to band together.
Do you... I agree with you. It just seems that it's really hard to get people who don't want to identify as Christian nationalists to come to the table and have that conversation. And I've seen this before with, there's been, you watch the whole thing that happened with Webben and G3. Like, I still am waiting to see a show where all three of them can sit down together and have this conversation publicly. But having people come to the table and say, okay, then how do we, let's have a church council. Let's talk about what it looks like for Christians to engage in politics. What does that even look like? It's hard to get those people to come to the table. From the other side, I see Christian nationalists all the time who want to have that conversation. But it reminds me of the fight of theonomy. It's so funny to me. I keep saying this, and I just want somebody to hear me out. But I remember
it's not going to work.
Okay, I'm trying. Earlier,
I'll be your confessional booth. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you, Pastor. 2000 teens. I was nobody wanted to have the conversation of theonomy. Everybody was opposed to it. Not having only behind closed doors. We'll poke it in public, and then we'll go away. As soon as COVID came, everybody became a theonomist, and I was like, wow. So actually, it was before COVID. The social justice movement forced everybody into a theonomic position. Right. All of a sudden, they said we have to have a biblical answer for how we do civil policies. Right. And this was surprising because I would have thought they would have had one a long time teaching ethics. But come to find out, whatever ethics they weren't teaching weren't actually biblical. Right. And so, but what they did was they took all the anonymous and they pushed them over here in the corner and said, we never have to deal with them. We never have to talk about them. We don't have to worry about their worldview and the implications of it. Social justice movement comes in and they open up the door and say, what were you guys saying about that law again? All right, thank you. And then they closed the door back and they started using all the talking points. Yeah. Okay. So everybody's statement on social justice, you look at them, they're all theonomic. But they didn't want to have the conversation 15, 20 years ago.
I think what's unique in this situation here is that when we look at COVID, it's remarkable to consider the fact that the hero of COVID in some ways for the evangelical church was John MacArthur, a dispensationalist who 15, 20 years ago was specifically saying Christians ought to stay away from cultural and political engagement. Right. But you can only say that in a land that's protected from political tyranny. Right. When the false priesthood strike, suddenly you're saying, it's really unique that the Torah had some interesting things to say about all these issues here. And so,
right. But that's what I mean. But imagine how much further along we would have been and churches would have been if we said, hey, let's have a council on this, or let's get together and have the conversation together somehow. Not like, we don't want to have that conversation with you guys and close the door. Then when COVID would have came in, everybody would have had a position on whether or not we should have our churches open. Yeah. Right? But because John MacArthur's church had to wait a couple weeks to figure it out and get together with their elders because we didn't have the conversation 20 years ago around the issue. This has been going on since the late 80s, actually before then. And now all of a sudden it's applicable in a way that it wasn't before. And I feel like with Christian nationalism, which is my point here, because we're not actually coming together, we're writing articles from one side, throwing salt on the other. We're like, hey, why don't you come and sit down and let's have a conversation? There's a fear there that if I lose a point, therefore then I have to become a Christian nationalist. Or how about we come together and work through our doctrine like we have throughout church history and say, brother, that's a good point. Let's work through that.
But that would assume, Knox, that all we're talking about is Christian nationalism.
Well, there goes that. There goes. No, you're right.
You're right. I think that's the answer. I think the answer is that I think there are exceptions. There are exceptions. Honest disagreement, where it was just straight. Sure. It's just straight up honest disagreement. I don't see that in the text, and I think those are the people that would be willing to talk. But I think the real problem. I don't know what you see, Uri, but I think the real problem is there's way more going on. I think there's turf wars going on.
I know.
I think there's envy, and I think there's covetousness.
I know.
And I think there's ambition, and I think there's flesh, and I think there's a bunch of that stuff still going on. And I think God is, in his kindness, is weeding a bunch of that out by putting us in trenches together. But you know,
yeah,
I mean,
unlikely trenches.
And it's like, I mean, it's like but that's the difference. I think that there's honest disagreement, honest debate, and those are the kinds of people that are willing to get together and talk.
I always tell my kids, you know, a spanking does make you repent of sin, but you don't always have to have a spanking.
That's right.
You don't always have to have. Anyway, I was go ahead. I'll let you answer that.
No, I wanted to plug in our lovely congregation in Porto Alegre, Brazil, that we planted 7 years ago, who were in many ways heroic. When we think of the things that happened in California, in contrast to what happened in that state, southern Brazil, I mean, California pales in comparison to the level of overreach that the government had. They were going to people's homes and arresting them if they had their businesses open or their churches open. Our little congregation, the Church of Christ in Porto Alegre, Brazil, remained open through the whole season. I dare say that I think they were the only church open in the entire state. And these guys embody the true priesthood. They understood that their role of a royal priesthood doesn't take a break, doesn't pause from doing what they're called to do. And I think that that's fundamental, is that when you begin to breathe that sort of heavenly air about what is the kingdom of God and how does it manifest its blueprint on earth, then it doesn't matter where you are. It doesn't matter where you are. That theology is going to come out one way or another, and it has come out very clearly in those guys. I'm very proud of the congregation and what Pastor Evandro has done over there. And I think I have been more hopeful in these last couple of years than I have been in a long time, because I think I've seen what you're trying to say, is that in the past you wouldn't see Presbyterians and Pentecostals getting together.
Right. I like the union. I ain't gonna lie. I like the union.
And I think what's happening right now is they're seeing precisely what Ephesians 6 says. They're seeing that there are principalities and powers, that there are dark spiritual forces, and that the church at this point right now is in a position to respond forcefully and courageously. And so these alliances happen. But again, these alliances need to happen on the basis of the normativity of scriptures. Any other foundation is sinking sand.
So,
amen.
Last word here, and I'll let you go. But as you're looking towards the future, I was telling you earlier, I think that we need a COVID 2.0. I don't think we got all the cancer out with COVID 1.0. Yeah. I don't want to see a COVID 2.0. I ain't gonna lie.
We need more COVID chemo.
Yes, we do. COVID chemo. But what should pastors be? What should be at the forefront of pastors' mind right now, post COVID, potentially going into whatever the future holds over the next 10 years as you see things? What needs to be at the forefront of the pastor's mind and how they need to be discipling their congregations?
Every good and healthy priesthood historically has functioned through their music, has functioned through the way they worship God with their songs. Again, back to the conversation about language. If we forsake the language that God has given us, then we are functioning on the basis of false languages that come through the lips of false priests. And so this is a stress that I make very often, is that we need to put men in a position where they're comfortable singing God's words. And the reason it requires a certain level of a little extra push is because evangelicals are very uncomfortable with the language of imprecation. But the way the church will move forward is truly by cursing through God's word, by cursing those who oppose God's plans. And the way that happens is through faithful singing. When singing becomes fundamental in a community, then a community is led by a different language. Augustine said that when you sing, you pray twice. And so what the church is doing is they're offering double prayers when they lift their songs to God. And so this is only one element, but I think it's an element that is often misunderstood and not given enough priority, because everyone in the world has a distinct musicology. They have a distinct hymnody. Because they have a distinct priesthood. And so they're offering their hymns, and the evangelical church has become very comfortable offering something similar to false hymns, right? Because they're afraid of embracing the language of the scriptures, specifically the language of the Psalms. And so I think a restoration of the Psalter to the evangelical church, specifically through the lips of men as they lead and guide their families and their communities, is going to be, at the very least, the beginning of a fruitful conversation.
That's good. Sing psalms, and you heard it here. The pastor says we need more cursing.
Pastor, thank you so much for coming.
Absolute delight, David, Toby. Thank you very much.
Always great to have you.
If you're single, get married. If you're married, have you some kids. And if you have kids, go baptize them. Until tomorrow, love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself. Go fight laugh, and feast. This is Cross Politic. And sing some psalms.
Yeah.
I need to learn some things.
Do that.
I hope my son is gay.
And I hope that Jesus forgives him just like he does the rest of us.
Doug Wilson, Moscow minister and columnist with the Idahonian Daily News.
The question that confronts us is, what does it mean in a disobedient culture to be prophetic?
There be a place for same-sex couples?
No marriage.
Even though it's the law of the land in the United States?
Just like Roe used to be. We want to turn the world upside down, and you don't turn the world upside down by being nice.
I believe that we are in this polytheistic, pluralistic moment, and the desperate need of the hour is for our Christian leadership to say, Jesus is Lord, and there is no other.
Fear no man.